The story of Iran and Israel is, honestly, a complex and often misunderstood journey. Today, on June 12, 2025, their relationship is defined by deep hostility and the constant threat of open war. They are seen as arch-enemies, each viewing the other as a major danger to its existence and regional stability. This animosity fuels conflicts across the Middle East, from Lebanon and Syria to Gaza and Yemen. The world watches with great concern, fearing that a direct clash between these two powerful nations could ignite a much larger, more devastating regional conflict. This current reality, however, is a stark contrast to their shared history, which was once marked by cooperation and even a quiet friendship. Understanding this dramatic shift is crucial to grasping the current tensions. It's easy to assume that their enmity is ancient and unchanging, rooted in deep cultural or religious divides. But that is not the case. For several decades, Iran and Israel shared strategic interests and maintained close ties. They worked together on military projects, shared intelligence, and engaged in significant economic trade. This period of friendship seems almost unbelievable from today's perspective, yet it forms the essential backstory to their present-day conflict. The journey from ally to adversary was not sudden but was triggered by a monumental event that reshaped Iran, and by extension, the entire Middle East. This essay will explore the full arc of this relationship. We will travel back in time to uncover the foundations of their early alliance, examining the political and strategic reasons that brought them together. Then, we will pinpoint the exact moment things began to change, detailing the ideological earthquake of the 1979 Iranian Revolution. We will look at how Iran's new leadership adopted a radically different worldview, placing opposition to Israel at the very center of its foreign policy. This exploration will guide us through the years of shadow war and into the recent, more direct and dangerous confrontations that have brought the region to a knife's edge. By tracing this path, we can better understand the motivations and fears driving both nations today. We will look at Iran's network of proxy groups, the so-called axis of resistance, and how they have become the primary tools in its long-standing campaign against Israel. We will also analyze the recent escalations that have shattered the unwritten rules of their conflict, leading to direct military strikes on each other's soil. Finally, we will consider the current perilous situation and what the future might hold. Is a full-scale war inevitable, or are there paths, however narrow, that might lead toward de-escalation and a more stable, peaceful future for the Middle East? Before the animosity that defines their relationship today, Iran and Israel actually shared a period of quiet but significant cooperation. This friendship began shortly after Israel's creation. In 1947, Iran was part of a United Nations committee discussing the future of Palestine. While it voted against the plan to partition the land, it took a practical step just a few years later. In 1950, Iran officially recognized the State of Israel, becoming only the second Muslim-majority country to do so. This was a pragmatic decision, not one based on shared ideology. Both nations were non-Arab powers in a predominantly Arab region, and they saw each other as potential partners against shared regional rivals, particularly the influential Arab nationalist movements of the time. This initial recognition blossomed into a much deeper relationship under the rule of Iran's Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. After a brief interruption in ties, the connection was restored following the 1953 coup. The Shah's government was strongly pro-Western and saw Israel as a key ally of the United States, its most important supporter. An unofficial Israeli embassy was established in Tehran, and the two countries began extensive collaboration. This partnership covered many areas, including military and intelligence cooperation. Israeli advisors helped train the Shah's secret police, SAVAK, and the two nations reportedly worked together on missile technology projects. This was a strategic alliance built on the principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Economic ties were also a vital component of this early friendship. Iran became a major supplier of oil to Israel through a secret pipeline deal. This was incredibly important for Israel, as most of its Arab neighbors refused to sell it oil due to political boycotts. In return, Israel provided Iran with agricultural technology, construction expertise, and other forms of technical assistance. The relationship was mutually beneficial, helping both countries strengthen their economies and enhance their security in a volatile neighborhood. For nearly 3 decades, this practical and productive partnership defined the interactions between Tehran and Tel Aviv. a reality that seems almost impossible to imagine today. This era of cooperation demonstrates that the current conflict is not based on an ancient or inevitable hatred. Instead, it was born from specific political and ideological shifts. The Iran of the Shah was a secular-leaning monarchy, aligned with the West and focused on modernization and national interest. It viewed the world through a lens of realpolitik, where alliances were formed based on strategic advantage rather than religious doctrine. This pragmatic approach allowed for a strong, if discreet, partnership with Israel. It was a relationship built on shared geopolitical concerns and practical needs, a foundation that would be completely shattered by the revolutionary storm that was gathering just over the horizon. The friendly relationship between Iran and Israel came to an abrupt and dramatic end in 1979. This was the year of the Iranian Revolution, a seismic event that overthrew the Shah and transformed the country into an Islamic republic. The revolution was led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a charismatic cleric who had been exiled for his opposition to the Shah. His vision for Iran was radically different. He rejected the Shah's pro-Western policies and sought to establish a new order based on his interpretation of Islamic principles. This new ideology placed Iran in direct opposition to the United States, which Khomeini famously labeled the Great Satan, and its closest regional ally, Israel, which he called the Little Satan. Immediately after the revolution, Iran's new leaders severed all diplomatic and economic ties with Israel. The Israeli embassy in Tehran was closed down and handed over to the Palestine Liberation Organization, a symbolic gesture that signaled a complete reversal of foreign policy. The new regime declared that it did not recognize the legitimacy of the State of Israel. Instead, it framed Israel as an illegitimate occupier of sacred Islamic lands and a tool of Western imperialism in the Middle East. Supporting the Palestinian cause became a core tenet of the Islamic Republic's identity and a central pillar of its foreign policy. This was not just a political disagreement, it was a fundamental ideological rejection of Israel's very right to exist. This ideological shift was rooted in Ayatollah Khomeini's worldview. He believed in exporting the Islamic Revolution and supporting oppressed Muslims around the world. In his view, the Palestinians were a prime example of such a group, and their struggle against Israel was a righteous one. This perspective transformed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from a distant, nationalistic dispute into a central religious and ideological battle for Iran. The new government in Tehran began to actively support Palestinian militant groups, providing them with funding, weapons, and training. This marked the beginning of a new and dangerous phase in the region, where Iran would use other groups to fight its battles. The revolution created a deep and lasting chasm between the two nations. Where the Shah saw a strategic partner, the Ayatollah saw an existential enemy. The shared interests that had once bound them together, containing Arab nationalism and aligning with the West, were gone. Iran was now a revolutionary power dedicated to challenging the regional order that the Shah had helped uphold. For Israel, this was a terrifying development. A large, powerful, and previously friendly nation on its periphery had suddenly become a sworn enemy committed to its destruction. The era of quiet cooperation was over, replaced by an age of open hostility and proxy warfare that continues to this day. After the 1979 revolution, Iran's new leaders knew that a direct conventional war against a powerful nation like Israel was risky and costly. Instead, they developed a more subtle and long-term strategy to challenge Israel and its Western allies. This strategy involved building a network of allied governments and non-state militant groups across the Middle East. This network is what Iran calls the axis of resistance. Its purpose is to surround Israel with hostile forces, exert pressure on its borders, and provide Iran with the ability to retaliate against Israeli or American actions without launching a direct attack from its own soil. This approach allows Iran to wage a war by proxy, using other groups to fight on its behalf. The cornerstone of this strategy is Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and specifically its elite overseas operations unit, the Quds Force. The Quds Force is responsible for training, funding, and arming these proxy groups. It provides them with advanced weapons, tactical guidance, and financial support, effectively turning them into extensions of Iranian power. By doing this, Iran can maintain a level of deniability. When one of its proxies attacks Israel, Tehran can claim it was not directly involved, even if its support was essential for the operation. This creates a strategic ambiguity that complicates any direct response against Iran itself, helping to avoid an all-out war. The axis of resistance extends across several key countries in the region, creating a land bridge of influence that stretches from Tehran to the Mediterranean Sea. The most important members of this axis are found in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and the Palestinian territories. In Syria, Iran has supported President Bashar al-Assad's government, establishing a military foothold there. In Iraq, it backs powerful Shia militias that have become integrated into the state's security forces. In Yemen, it supports the Houthi movement. Each of these groups serves a strategic purpose, allowing Iran to project its power far beyond its borders and challenge the interests of its adversaries across a wide geographic area. This proxy network is not just a collection of random militias, it is a carefully constructed strategic asset. It gives Iran what strategists call strategic depth, meaning it can absorb an attack or retaliate from multiple locations, not just from within its own borders. For Israel, this network represents a formidable and ever-present threat. Instead of facing one enemy state, it is now surrounded by a ring of well-armed, highly motivated groups dedicated to its destruction, all backed by the resources and guidance of a powerful regional state. This strategy of proxy warfare has defined the Iran-Israel conflict for decades, creating a constant state of low-level warfare that periodically erupts into more serious confrontations. Among the many groups in Iran's so-called axis of resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon is, honestly, probably the most powerful and sophisticated. Often considered the crown jewel of Iran's proxy network, Hezbollah was formed in the early 1980s with, extensive help from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It actually emerged in response to Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon. Over the years, Hezbollah has grown from a small militia into a really formidable military and political force. It now possesses a massive arsenal of rockets and missiles that are capable of striking deep inside Israel, and its fighters are, both well-trained and battle-hardened. Hezbollah effectively operates as a sort of state within a state in Lebanon, controlling territory and wielding significant political power, all while remaining loyal to Iran's revolutionary ideology. Another key component of Iran's proxy strategy involves its support for Palestinian militant groups, most notably Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or PIJ. While Hamas is a Sunni Muslim organization with its own independent origins, it has received significant funding, weapons, and training from Shia-led Iran, especially when other Arab patrons have, distanced themselves. This support is really based on their shared goal of opposing Israel. Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strip, has fought several wars with Israel, launching thousands of rockets and carrying out attacks against Israeli soldiers and civilians. PIJ is even more closely aligned with Iran, acting as a direct proxy and often instigating conflicts with Israel at Tehran's behest. More recently, the Houthi movement in Yemen has emerged as another important player in Iran's regional network. The Houthis, who are a Zaidi Shia group, have been engaged in a long civil war in Yemen. With Iranian support, they've developed advanced military capabilities, including long-range ballistic missiles and armed drones. They have used these weapons to attack not only their rivals in Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but also targets much farther away. In solidarity with the Palestinians and really at Iran's encouragement, the Houthis have launched missile and drone attacks towards southern Israel and have disrupted international shipping in the Red Sea, which demonstrates the growing reach and ambition of Iran's proxy network. These groups basically act as Iran's forward defense, allowing it to confront Israel without risking a direct war. So, when Israel takes action that Iran wants to counter, it can activate one or more of these proxies. For example, Hezbollah can launch rockets from Lebanon, Hamas can initiate attacks from Gaza, and the Houthis can create chaos in vital shipping lanes. This multi-front threat, honestly, complicates Israel's military planning and stretches its defensive resources. The actions of these proxies ensure that the conflict remains a constant, simmering reality for Israel, turning its borders into active fronts in a long and grinding war of attrition orchestrated from Tehran. For many years, the conflict between Iran and Israel was fought as a shadow war. This meant that their confrontations were mostly covert, secret, and indirect. Instead of open battles, they engaged in espionage, cyber attacks, targeted assassinations, and sabotage. Israel was widely believed to be behind a series of mysterious explosions at Iranian nuclear facilities and the assassination of several top Iranian nuclear scientists. For instance, in November 2021, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, a key figure in Iran's nuclear program, was killed near Tehran by a remote-controlled machine gun, an operation that bore all the hallmarks of a sophisticated Israeli intelligence mission. These actions were designed to slow down Iran's nuclear ambitions without triggering a full-scale war. Iran, for its part, also engaged in this shadow war. It was accused of planning attacks on Israeli diplomats and tourists abroad. It also used its proxies to carry out strikes that were deniable. A notable example occurred in July 2021, when an oil tanker managed by an Israeli-owned company was attacked by a drone off the coast of Oman, killing 2 crew members. While Iran denied involvement, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel all concluded that Tehran was behind the attack. These tit-for-tat actions were the unwritten rules of their conflict. Both sides would strike at each other, but they would do so quietly and indirectly, avoiding actions that could lead to an uncontrollable escalation. However, in recent years, the line between the shadow war and open conflict has become increasingly blurred. The unwritten rules began to break down as both sides became more willing to take direct and public credit for their actions. Israel, for example, started openly acknowledging its airstrikes in Syria. These strikes were aimed at preventing Iran from transferring advanced weapons to Hezbollah and establishing a permanent military presence there. By publicly admitting to these operations, Israel was sending a clear message to Iran that it would not tolerate an Iranian military buildup on its northern border. This shift from covert to overt action raised the stakes significantly. The turning point that pushed the conflict out of the shadows and into the open came with a series of dramatic escalations that began in late 2023. The conflict was no longer just about secret operations and proxy attacks, it was moving toward direct state-on-state confrontation. The old rules of engagement were being discarded, replaced by a more dangerous and unpredictable dynamic. Each side felt compelled to respond more forcefully to the other's provocations, creating a cycle of escalation that brought them closer to a direct military clash than ever before. The long and simmering shadow war was finally erupting into flames. The year 2024 marked a terrifying new chapter in the Iran-Israel conflict, as the long-standing shadow war erupted into unprecedented direct military exchanges. The catalyst was an Israeli airstrike on April 1, 2024, that destroyed an Iranian diplomatic building, a consulate annex in Damascus, Syria. This attack killed several high-ranking Iranian military officials, including a top commander of the IRGC's Quds force. For Iran, this was a major provocation. Attacking a diplomatic compound is considered an attack on sovereign territory, and killing such a senior commander was a direct challenge that demanded a powerful response. The world held its breath, waiting to see how Tehran would retaliate. Iran's response came less than 2 weeks later. In a historic move, Iran launched its first-ever direct military attack on Israeli territory from its own soil. It fired a massive barrage of over 300 drones and missiles toward Israel. This was a significant escalation, as Iran had previously relied on its proxies to attack Israel. The attack was largely thwarted. Israel, with help from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Jordan, intercepted the vast majority of the projectiles. However, the psychological impact was immense. Iran had demonstrated its willingness and capability to strike Israel directly, shattering a decades-old taboo and changing the nature of their conflict forever. The cycle of retaliation continued. Israel responded to Iran's attack with its own limited but direct strikes a few days later. Israeli warplanes reportedly hit an air defense radar site near an Iranian nuclear facility, sending a clear and deliberate message. The strike was designed to show that Israel could penetrate Iran's airspace and strike sensitive targets at will, but it was also calibrated to avoid causing major damage or casualties that would force Iran into another massive retaliation. This careful, tit-for-tat exchange of direct fire showed that while both sides were willing to cross previous red lines, they were also still wary of triggering an all-out uncontrollable war. This period of direct confrontation continued to escalate throughout 2024, with both sides targeting high-value assets. In September, a precision Israeli airstrike in Beirut assassinated Hassan Nasrallah, the powerful and long-serving leader of Hezbollah. This was a devastating blow to Iran's proxy network. In response, in October, Iran launched another, even larger, ballistic missile attack on Israel, firing nearly 200 missiles. While again largely intercepted, the scale of the attack was alarming. Israel retaliated with a series of airstrikes on military sites inside Iran, including near the capital, Tehran. The shadow war was officially over. The two nations were now engaged in a direct, open, and incredibly dangerous military conflict. As of today, June 12, 2025, the situation between Iran and Israel remains extremely tense. The direct military exchanges of 2024 have set a new and dangerous precedent. The conflict has moved from the shadows into the open, and both nations are on high alert. Israel has continued its military campaign in the region, launching an invasion of southern Lebanon with the stated goal of dismantling Hezbollah's military infrastructure near its border and creating a buffer zone. This ground operation has led to fierce fighting and has drawn Iran even deeper into the conflict, as it seeks to protect its most valuable proxy ally. In response to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, Iran has threatened a crushing response and has continued its missile attacks. The constant threat of another large-scale missile barrage keeps Israel's air defense systems on constant alert, and its population in a state of anxiety. The world is deeply worried because each new attack and counterattack carries the risk of miscalculation. A missile that slips through defenses and causes mass casualties, or a strike that hits a highly sensitive site, could trigger a massive, unrestrained response, pulling the entire region into a devastating war that would involve not only Iran and Israel, but also their respective allies. Complicating this already volatile situation is the issue of Iran's nuclear program. Diplomatic efforts to revive the nuclear deal have been underway, with talks beginning in Oman in April 2025. However, the positions of both sides remain far apart. The United States is demanding the complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, a condition that Iran's supreme leader has publicly rejected as unrealistic. With diplomacy faltering, Israeli leaders have openly discussed the possibility of a preemptive military strike to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, which they see as an existential threat. The intelligence community believes that Israel may be making concrete preparations for such a high-stakes operation. The United States has tried to navigate this crisis by increasing its military presence in the region to deter Iran, while also urging Israel to show restraint. The American position is to give diplomacy a chance, but it has not ruled out supporting military action if talks fail completely. The great fear is that an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear sites would force Tehran to retaliate with all its might, likely using its entire axis of resistance to launch a multi-front assault on Israel and United States interests in the region. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps diplomats and military planners awake at night. A regional war with catastrophic global consequences for security and the world economy. The long and difficult journey of the Iran-Israel relationship, from quiet allies to overt enemies, has brought the Middle East to a perilous crossroads. The current state of hostility is not sustainable. The cycle of direct attacks and retaliations has created a dangerously unstable environment where a small misstep could easily spiral into a full-blown regional war. The international community, led by the United States and other global powers, has a critical role to play in pulling both nations back from the brink. Urgent and persistent diplomatic engagement is needed to re-establish lines of communication and create off-ramps to de-escalate the immediate crisis. One possible path forward, though difficult, lies in successfully negotiating a new agreement over Iran's nuclear program. A verifiable deal that limits Iran's nuclear capabilities in exchange for sanctions relief could lower the temperature significantly. It would remove what Israel considers an existential threat, reducing the likelihood of a preemptive Israeli strike. For Iran, it would provide much-needed economic relief and a pathway back into the international community. While current talks are stalled, a renewed and creative diplomatic push could still yield a breakthrough. This would not solve all the problems between them, but it would address the most dangerous element of their conflict. Another crucial element for long-term peace is addressing the underlying issues that Iran uses to justify its axis of resistance. Chief among them, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As long as this conflict remains unresolved, Iran will always have a powerful ideological tool to rally support and justify its hostile posture toward Israel. A genuine and credible peace process that leads to a two-state solution or another just and lasting settlement would rob Iran of its primary cause. it would change the dynamics of the entire region, making it much harder for Tehran to mobilize its proxies and maintain its narrative of resistance against an occupying power. Ultimately, the future of Iran-Israel relations will depend on the choices made in Tehran and Tel Aviv. A future of endless conflict, economic ruin, and human suffering is one possibility. However, another future is also possible. One where visionary leaders on both sides recognize that their national security and prosperity are better served by de-escalation and eventual coexistence. This would require a monumental shift away from decades of entrenched ideology and mutual demonization. It seems unlikely today, but history has shown that even the bitterest of enemies can find a path to peace. For the sake of their own people and the stability of the world, we must hope they find that path before it is too late.